And welcome to the Tabletop Express. My name is Chris Barrows. I'm here with the often visiting Anthony of Board Game Dads. Anthony, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me back on the Express. And just to get into theme a little bit here, I have a surprise for you.
You beat me to it. I still need my conductor's hat.
Yeah, I stole I stole it from my son, so there's that.
Okay, well, I'll allow it. My daughter does not have one that I can take from. So look, we're here tonight. I'm excited. We are here for the first edition of Family Faceoff. And Family Faceoff came from, just so everyone knows, a conversation Anthony and I were actually having about just games as a whole and how there's so many of them that exist within a family of maybe same theme, same general game, but the mechanics being different and the change the game completely and allow it to be a brand new experience. I'd argue, Anthony, that doesn't mean you necessarily need to own both in all cases, so it may vary. In my particular case, I'll go to one that maybe we'll talk about in the future, but that's Sushi Go. And I have Sushi Go Party. I also have Sushi Roll. I like owning them both, but I don't know if it's always the case.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you own any games where you own maybe both of a variety of versions?
I own both of what you just said. I do have Sushi Go Party and Roll. And I think they play differently enough, especially at the 2-player level, that I'm okay with having both of them in my collection for sure. Other than that, oh yeah, you know what? So here's a funny one. I own Castles of Burgundy as well as Castles of Burgundy, the dice game, and Castles of Burgundy, the card game. I have never played the card game. I know nothing about it, but it's like the exact same box as the dice game, except it's a different shade. But yeah, there's that.
Awesome. Well, I will say this. This episode tonight, we're going to be talking about Herbaceous and Herbaceous Sprouts. As we talk about Herbaceous Sprouts, I want to first talk a little bit about Herbaceous and Herbaceous Sprouts. I first want to do a little brief introduction to both these games. And what I would like to read is from Board Game Geek, their basic descriptions, and then some of their basic rankings, just to give you an idea of where these games are at. Herbaceous says, relax as you collect and plant an assortment of flavorful herbs in your garden. This is from 2017, and it's 228 in terms of family games, 934 overall. Sprouts, a newer game, 2019, use tools and plant colorful seeds to grow your sprouts in the community garden. Mm-hmm. And that is ranked 2,825. I say this because ranks, as much as they're on here, don't mean anything to me. I don't care about ranks on Board Game Geek. Number one on Board Game Geek for a long time has been Gloomhaven, which I own and have not played. I've played one level of it, and it's sad and pathetic, and people can yell at me about that. So let's talk about these two games. And to get into these two games, let's start with Herbaceous. I think it's interesting here. We should point out that you can speak to Herbaceous. I can't speak to Herbaceous as the base game. I haven't played it. I've watched reviews. I've watched gameplay. But you're going to talk a little bit about Herbaceous. I will be talking, when we get to that point, about Herbaceous Sprouts. Mm-hmm. And that'll be a little bit different. So for me, let's get into the game that started it all, because that's important to me, and that's why we're going to lead with that. So let's dig into this. What do you want to talk about in terms of the actual gameplay of this game, and how does it play out? Because I think that's what people are most interested in whenever they watch a video for these. How does the game actually play?
Yeah. And this is a really simple one in both setup and gameplay, really. To set up, all you do is give each person a set of 4 planter cards that are identical. Everybody has the same 4 cards. And then you just set up this little sort of barrier that says private garden. That's just a way to separate your cards from the cards in the middle of the table, which are part of the community garden. So every player would have access to that. And then beyond that is their private garden. And in terms of gameplay, a game that has only two possible things you can do on your turn. It doesn't really get much simpler than that. And one of those is optional. So you're not even going to do it every time. What I like about this game is it has a mechanism where on your turn, you are going to draw a card from the pile and either place that card in your private garden or in the community garden that we talked about. You then draw a second card and you put that in the opposite place of where you put the first one. So if you put that in your private garden, second card goes in the community garden and vice versa. And that's it. Now, as simple as it is, you really want to pay attention to what you're putting in that community garden because remember, everyone has access to it, as well as you want to pay attention to your opponent's private gardens as well because you want to see what they're collecting. And the whole point of that is going back to the first thing you can do on your turn, which is optional, is to plant your herbs in any of those 4 planter types that you have. And each one has like a different condition for planting. So, for example, one of them has to be planted with all of the same herb, right? One of them is the opposite and has to be planted with all different herbs. No repeats are allowed. A third one is for pairs of herbs. So it's how many cards you have of pairs to plant there. And the last one is kind of special because it's the glass jar. And there's 3 types of herb in the game that are special herbs. I believe it's mint, maybe chives, and something else. I forget. And they can only go in that glass jar planter. And they're worth a certain amount of points depending on which ones you do. So, like I said before, you want to pay attention to what you're putting out there in the community and what you're putting out in front of you, what your opponent has, because you can only fill these 4 planters one time during the game, right? So you can see here that one in the upper left is the one where they all have to be identical. And you can see there that it scales. So the more cards you have when you decide to use that planter, the more points you're going to get. But you can only do it one time. So it becomes this almost like a push your luck element as well. Like how far do you want to go before you decide to use that planter? Maybe you have, and here's the kicker. So when you do these planters, you have a combination of your private garden cards and the community garden cards, right? So if you want to fill up that planter with 7 different herbs, you might be taking 4 from your private garden and 3 from community garden. So you want to pay attention to what's out there because you might not want your opponent to snatch those up when they do their planting. That's a very long-winded explanation of the game.
I have to say first and foremost that, and as we're looking at this, I'm going to just make it a little bit bigger so you can see. One thing that we're going to find similar as we talk about this is part of the gameplay is very similar in the same versus different category that exists in this game. Not everything carries over, but that's one thing that's going to be the same. But again, the visuals on these, I think, are worth noting. And the art in both of these games, I should note, Benjamin Schulman and Beth Sobel. And I feel like when I see beautiful art lately, it seems like it's Beth Sobel. So I don't know why that is. Beth Sobel's just been all over my world lately. So it's never shocking to me when I see Beth Sobel and art that makes me go, wow, that's fantastic. When you talk about this game and its gameplay, I mean, I'll say this, Board Game Geek gives it a weight of 1.78 out of 5. So pretty easy to pick up really in terms of a game. It's not a very heavy game.
Right.
Yeah. And for me, one of the reasons why I was interested, I apologize. It's 1.18 actually. It's 1.18.
Oh, wow. That's even lighter. Okay.
Yeah. Now, Herbaceous Sprouts, interestingly enough, is 1.78. I was reading the notes a little bit wrong there. And as I talk about Herbaceous Sprouts and break down gameplay, I think you're going to see a few things that are in common between these two games. First and foremost, Herbaceous Sprouts is a game that involves dice. Dice are heavily involved in this game. They're involved in every single play. And this photo, by the way, from Board Game Geek, Gregory M. Chung, is where I actually took this photo because I thought it displayed the board really, really well. And I wanted to showcase that. What you're looking at is the game board. And in the middle of this game board, one thing that I think is important to note, you're going to see some similar symbols. You're going to see that in the upper left, you've got a spot where you're going to be able to play combinations of dice in terms of being all the same. You've got in the upper right, all different. In the bottom left, different pairs. So you need pairs of dice, but they got to be different. And in the bottom right, you've got this kind of planting garden where you need to have the planting, the tool to be able to do it. And then you can plant them. But there's different higher scoring areas. Now, what's interesting to me about this game, a few things we should point out. Each turn at the upper part that you're seeing here, there is a deck of cards, and you're going to pull out the amount of cards for players in the game +1. Now, what is extremely important for me to point out, and I just want to kind of bring this up now, and I think it's really important to stress, this game has a rival player. Okay, the rival player is extremely important because the rival player is in every game unless you're playing with 4 players. So if you're playing with 2 players, there's a rival player. 3 players, there's a rival player. If you're playing with 4 players, no rival player, there's no room for them at that point. But the rival player mechanic, which I can imagine some people here, oh, there's a computer AI of sorts. I don't know if I like that. This is so brilliantly done in this game. I have never been this complimentary of kind of an AI component here because it adds a strategic methodology to the game. Because when you go and we look at these cards, when you look at what's on the table, in the bottom left-hand corner of each one of these cards is a symbol. And that is where, if it gets to the rival player, they're going to put their piece. Meaning you can use that spot to potentially block an opponent for a spot that you could tell they're going for, or you can do it because maybe you don't care so much, or, it could be a variety of reasons. But I love the idea that you can use it to strategically block someone tentatively because it can be done in that way. Or sometimes you might really want something, so you're not going to care. But the rival player plays very well in this game. Now, the other thing I note about this game is these beautifully colored dice that you're going to be putting in your wheelbarrow. And this is a look at your wheelbarrow. So as these cards come out each turn, whoever's first player is going to pick one of the cards that you saw on the board, take them and their dice and put their dice in the wheelbarrow. You can have up to 7 dice in your wheelbarrow. You can't ever have more than 7. At the cleanup phase, which is the last phase, you're actually going to put any extra dice or any ones that you want back into the bag. You can only have 7. What's great about this board, and I give it a lot of credit for this, and this may impact its weight, which again, Board Game Geek listed at 1.78 out of 5. Look at the symbols on the left-hand side and on the bottom. This is what all those different dice faces mean. So you know that right away. And again, there's a variety here on this board. And again, you're going to collect your dice. Your card is going to actually have an action. So I'm going to go back briefly here, and I'm just going to say, look at the cards here. You'll see, for example, the gloves, the water can. The one actually all the way in the upper right there has 3 gloves and 2 bags. That one, you're actually going to pick 2 dice out of a bag, and you can re-roll them after the initial roll. Well, you can re-roll 1 die up to 3 times because that's what each one of those gloves does. So there's a lot of different actions you can take. Based off what you said, I can already tell you a little bit more complicated than the version of Herbaceous that you have. And I think that's very intentional. Now, the thing I will say is the board has this very pleasant feel to it. You're looking at a game that my wife and I actually played over the weekend. The pink one and blue sky pieces are ours. And then those other pieces you see on the board were the rivals pieces. Now, I ended up winning this game by literally only 2 points. It was a very close game, and the rival, I think, only had 21. So I don't imagine the rival becomes great competition. But what's nice about it is it does kind of block up the board in these 2-player games, and it scales up very well. And for me, that last phase where you're taking these dice that you've collected and trying to get them down is a ton of fun. Keep in mind, again, you've got these cards with reroll actions. You've got dice that have reroll actions. The dice and the cards can all help you do the actions you need. I could list every action that you can take, but honestly, there's just so many different actions in the game that are available to you. The core ones that you're going to have are reroll, and core ones are reroll, planting in the garden. There's additional ones where you can trade in pieces, so you can trade in 2 for 1. So variety of these abilities, but again, all outlined on that wagon. And to me, they streamline the process so easily. We learned this within 1.5 turns. We felt like, okay, we know what we're doing. It goes, for a 2-player game, it went about 10 rounds, and then it kind of goes down from there. But again, a very easy game, a lot of fun. And again, it looks great on the table, which I always like a game that plays well. If you've listened to this channel, I like a game that looks good and plays well. It's very important to me that it looks good now, to some extent. Like I have trouble still with Castles of Burgundy for that exact reason. I want to love Castles of Burgundy, but I struggle with it, even though I know it's a great game. But this one, I will say the dice, nice chunky dice. You take them in a bag, you roll them. There's a lot of fun in that.
I have a question about the dice.
Sure.
Do you have to sticker those dice yourself, or do they come
No, you do not. No. You do not sticker the dice. They come as they are. And again, different dice have, they're color coded. So for example, what some of the special abilities of certain dice will be. So some dice will have that ability to plant in that community garden. And that's where the community garden play comes in. So you mentioned the community garden on yours. You mentioned that community garden. And in mentioning that, I will just say, if we go back, I'm going to go ahead and actually bring up a visual from yours. But correct me if I'm wrong, but the community garden is what's in the middle of this board.
Yes, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
So that community garden, in a way, is kind of the same thing, played very differently, obviously. That is in the right-hand corner of the playing board for this. But you need to be able to plant in that community garden is a little bit different. That community garden, you're let's put it this way, you need to have the proper flower, and you need to be able to have a planting tile. There is something I should have noted, by the way, that I think is important. There are tiles that have, and I'm trying to see if I have one here. Unfortunately, I don't. I thought I pulled a photo of it. But there are actually cards that have like a pot on the bottom with one of the certain flowers, and those you actually can store under your board and use them at a later time. So those are pretty useful. It's not just with the flowers; it's with it's with any type of visual that's on a dice. So that is helpful, and that does allow you to have some advantage later on in the game because you get to keep those cards. Otherwise, the cards, if you don't use the action, they go back in the discard pile and they're done.
Okay.
So, but that is Herbaceous Sprouts, which, like I said, I think it's a wonderful game. I think it's a well-designed game, and honestly, very easy to learn. Both these games, we should note again, because we want to give the credit where it's due. Designers, Eduardo Baroth, Steve Finn, Keith Njika, and then artist is Benjamin Schulman and Beth Sobel, publisher Pencil First Games. So this is where I'd love for us to be able to have that time to maybe pose some questions to each other, because what I'm interested in is in that community garden piece for Herbaceous. Are we constantly going to find ourselves in the community garden in that game? Is it at the core of it a very interactive game?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I don't feel that if you're not looking at the community garden and your opponent's garden on every turn, I think you're missing something, because it's because you can only plant one time, and there's only 4 things to plant in, so you're only planting a total of 4 times in the game. You got to make the most of it, right? And for the same reason, you want your opponent to have the least amount of access to stuff. So it's a really interesting back and forth for a very simple game. So I'd say, yeah, for at least for our version, for my version that I'm talking about, the community garden is something that you should always have your eyes on. Do you feel that that's different in Sprouts?
This is definitely different because what you are doing in this, in I think in Sprouts, just as you see here again, this photo by Gregory Chung, Board Game Geek photo. This one, you see the upper left. You can see how there's a sign that says 3, 4, 5, 6 as an example. Well, that means you have to have 2, 3 of the same kind, 4 of the same kind, 5 of the same kind, or 6 of the same kind. This can be challenging to accomplish if you're not focused strategically on where you're going to want to put it. So you need to be thinking about where you want to go. It's less interactive in that sense. So what you're talking about, I think it sounds like is a little bit more interactive. I'm not saying less strategic. Well, I just think Sprouts is very strategic in every move that you're making. But I do think there's a little bit less of that interaction. I don't want to call it take that though, because just because you're not taking a spot necessarily to take that, it's sometimes it's just that it's the opportunistic thing to do. Like, I've got 3 of a kind. Do I want to 3 different types? Do I want to try and wait a turn, not do anything, and then get a 4th or a 5th, right? Because my reroll didn't go the way I wanted it. I got to think about that. Because the planting action, that action where you're actually going to put a piece on the board, is the last phase before cleanup. So you've got a bunch of actions prior to get there. And I say planting, I should say that's not including the bottom right part, because the bottom right part, you technically might do it based on the card action that you have. But yeah, so to me, less interactive based on what we're talking about thus far.
Overall, I find it interesting that, and I guess the BGG numbers kind of prove it, but like you said, it sounds like Sprouts is a little more of a complicated, it's not complicated, but it's a little more complicated than Herbaceous, which I find interesting because normally when this, sort of thing happens where a second version of a game comes out, which a lot of times is like something, the dice game, which Herbaceous might as well be called Herbaceous the dice game.
It's true.
It's usually simpler, right? And this is sort of the opposite, which I think is definitely in the minority of cases for sure, in terms of games that have a sort of sister version to them. Would you agree?
I agree. And I definitely, again, this also has, I'd argue, a little bit potentially more luck, because you are, so as much as it's
there's dice, so
yeah, but it's funny because I still think it in a lot of ways just as strategic,
right?
But you are kind of thinking about that dice. The thing is, when you look at that board, the dice that are on, for example, the cards that are coming out at the start of each round, you are going to know what they are. It's not like you're rolling the dice in that moment. So the cards come out, whoever is the lead gardener will roll dice based on the spots for each of those and place them. So you know what you're going to be able to take. So it's not as much luck in that sense, but there are those cards, like as I noted, and there's one card that's got like 2 bags and 3 gloves. That's a card you could take and literally say, okay, I'm going to pull 2 dice out and I'm going to roll. I'm going to have up to 3 rerolls of any of these dice, which includes any dice. And if I am, and I played this 2-3 times now, but that's any dice on your wagon. So you aren't just necessarily re-rolling something that you just got. You're re-rolling anything from that wagon. And there is strategy in that, because you can take something, know that I've got 3 shots to re-roll and get what I need. But I agree. It's definitely more complex in that sense. And again, I want to go back. The other thing that makes this different is I don't believe in I don't know if there exists a AI or on Herbaceous.
Well, there has to be something, because I believe it does play at 1 player. Am I looking at the box correctly? Yeah, plays 1 to 4. So there's some kind of solo mode.
Gotcha.
I don't know if it's all just in terms of like collecting certain things. If there's any action that happens, I don't know that version really. But
here's what's interesting: Herbaceous Sprouts has a master gardener mode, which is its solo mode, but it actually involves different cards. So there's actually cards. I didn't feature that here, but you would actually flip over a master card, and then it's an assistant card. So the master card has a deck of cards that you flip over, and it tells you the action what card it's going to take from the center of the board. Then it goes to assistant, and so it's you're swapping between different things, but it's a completely different mode. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Keith actually designed the solo mode specifically. I'm on that one. So the solo mode is very specifically designed in that way. I played this with 2, 3, and 1 thus far. So I can speak to all of them. I really like the solo mode, but the solo mode was tough. Maybe I was just really bad. It's possible. I struggled a little bit. I think I scored, it was like 36 to 34. So I was like, it was -2. And
wow.
yeah, and you don't get even credit for anything when you lose, obviously. Yeah, Danielle, by the way, popping in saying yay for solo mode. Danielle, if you all missed it, it was part of our solo video, and I know Danielle appreciates those solo modes, but yeah, this is a specifically designed solo mode that is just very well done. And I was very impressed by it, to say the least. But yeah,
So
yeah.
going back to the AI in a 2 or 3 player game, so it is possible for hypothetically both players to lose this game against like the game.
So I guess so. I wouldn't estimate that it wouldn't happen very often.
Okay.
Just based off my play with my wife, we picked the game up fairly quickly. I think the AI, it's very easy as you get late in the game to stop the rival gardener from scoring, because you can very easily, there's only so many spots it can take, and you're going to fill up a lot of those spots. When you're playing the solo mode, that's a little bit of a different of a beast, because this often is going to take a spot that is just, you need it, but you've got to pick this other spot. And I'd argue it's unlikely. I don't think the rival would be, I mean, maybe there is a way, but I don't envision it happening. Not with anyone who is even a average game player.
Right.
But yeah, I guess technically it's possible. But again, it adds this night mechanic. And I should note there's a lemonade card in this game, because I didn't mention this before. Lemonade card in this game. So if I was to get plant something in every section of the board, I get the lemonade card, and that's worth 2 extra points. So,
that's right. I forgot to mention the coveted herb biscuit. What was I thinking? I think there's a picture of that. Can you go back to that one? So the herb biscuit is, I believe, if you're the first player to plant those 3 special herbs, then you get the herb biscuit, which is worth 5 extra points. So you play this game with yours side by side, and you have a snack and a lemonade as well.
Yeah, it looks like, really, when you think about this, the best way to describe it, that area, that lemonade is the same, and that kind of corner spot is really is the equivalent of the glass jar. That's the best way to describe it. So it's less so the community guard, but it's that corner spot on Sprouts is very much going to be, it's a garden. Right. It's not a glass jar, but that's where the same kind of mechanic is coming into play. I like this though. When I saw this, it was funny. The first thing that jumps to my mind is, oh, this is set collection, right? And then you're trying, but when you add in the factor that you talked about, which I found fascinating, and I'm trying to think of a game that does it, set collection, but you've only got one shot to do the real planting. Yeah. I don't know of another game off the top of my head, and I'm sure there's something, because there usually is, but that's one of the first ones I've heard that occurs. So that makes this a little bit unique to me. It also sounds like if I'm teaching someone a game who's not used to playing a game, it might be a little friendlier in a lot of ways to play Herbaceous over Sprouts, because Sprouts, well, it's not complicated in my opinion. It's still, again, under a 2 out of 5 on Board Game Geek. It's definitely up a notch in terms of difficulty.
Sure. Yeah.
But I guess I posed this from, I thought it'd be fun for us to talk about what maybe your favorite mechanic of the first of your game that you talked about is, and then sharing from what each other shared, what interested you most about the other one. And I'll start with this. What I really liked about this particular game was the fact that, and I've mentioned a few times, that the rival player is the most interesting rival player I have dealt with, or that the most interesting time where I have to go against someone who's not playing the game in reality. Right. And to me, it's so well done. It adds such strategic value, and I have not experienced that. Where to the point that I was excited to play the solo mode, because even though because it was different, but it had that a similar feel, and it meant going to the solo mode. What didn't feel like going to, and not that every game feels this way, but sometimes it does. I didn't feel like I was going to a completely different style. It felt like more of the same, and to me, I don't know, that stood out to me. With yours, I just love the set collection. With Herbaceous, I
Yeah.
should have to say, I love set collection. I think set collection is a fantastic mechanism, and
I do as well. And it's such an easy thing for people to relate to. And I've said this before in teaching games. If you're teaching a game to someone who's ever played Rummy in their life, which is a lot of people, then you can explain a set collection mechanism to someone in another game. And like this one where there's basically that's all you're doing, there's not too much else to teach. But going back to your question about what I like in particular, I think what stands out for me the most is that mechanism of drawing one card and deciding which garden to put it in. But whatever you do, the next card that you pull is going to the opposite spot. So you may get to a point where you're in a jam and you pick that one card like, oh well, I certainly don't want the community garden to get this because I don't want anybody to have it but me. So you place it in my private garden. And then you draw the next card, you're like, oh no, I don't want them to have this one either, but I have to put it there. And that's kind of interesting. I don't know any other game that does that specifically. And again, like you said, I'm sure there is one. But if there is, I'd love to know about it because that's a really interesting thing for me.
Yeah, I have no clue. I can't think of one. I was trying to, as you were talking about it, I was thinking to myself, is there something that does that? And I mean, I have Board Game Geek up. I'm not searching it, but I don't know.
I don't even know if there's a name for that, like that mechanism. I don't know.
Nothing comes to my mind. Certainly. We've talked about both these games, Anthony. When it comes down to it, I'd argue from what you talked about, what I talked about, you could own both of these and get a completely different experience in a very positive way. I think Herbaceous goes for about $20 on average, and this one goes for more about 30. So for $50, that's pretty two darn good games in my opinion.
I think you're right. I think they play pretty differently to the point where they could almost be called two different games and you wouldn't know that they were sister games necessarily. Real quick, I do want to point out, because we're talking about Pencil First games, they just had a Kickstarter that ended, I guess early this morning or last night, right?
It was, I shared something about it and they were at 4 hours at some point today. So it must have been officially today that they finished. And I know they were successful, which no surprise.
Yeah. And that's another flower game. Floriferous. Am I saying that correctly?
I believe it is Floriferous based on what I saw on Kickstarter.
But right when we talked about pairing things together, that's what made me think of the Kickstarter, because they had a few pledge level options where you could get Floriferous and Herbaceous together. They didn't have a Floriferous and Herbaceous Sprouts, where I probably would have pledged to that level, but they did have Floriferous and Sunset Over Water, which is a game I think has a beautiful look to it as well, that I've had my eye on for quite some time. So I figured I might as well combine some shipping and get those two things. So that's what I pledged for when I did that. I believe it was last night.
Yeah, and that game, I know, just because they do it, there's a late pledge. So if you haven't got in, you could still get in on any of that. That's the one thing I always laugh about Kickstarters. If I didn't get in, certainly I could still get in, but I like to get in early and participate on these things. So for me, that's important. And speaking of participating, I want to thank those who did join live. Saw a few of you pop in and out throughout. Always appreciate that. In terms of participating, we've got some things you can participate in with us. First and foremost, I got to say, next on the Express is going to be a conversation with Denny Lowe, Pandasaurus Games. That's on Creators Corner coming up on Thursday at 8:30. Really excited about this chat. I have enjoyed Creators Corner. It was at the core of when I started this channel of what I wanted to do. And so always going to dig that. But I know, Anthony, you've got something in the wings as well.
That's right. And it is pretty related to our theme here today. That's the Board Game Holiday Spotlight on National Gardening Day. So the actual gardening day is April 14th. I believe the video should be dropping on that day or a couple days before, but you might just see a familiar face or two on there and even a familiar game. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, and so we hope you'll check that out. Again, this has been a ton of fun for me. I want to thank Anthony for trying this out. We'll certainly be looking at. It sounds like we already have in the wings one that we kind of got to do, which is a little bit of Sushi Go Party or Sushi Go, I guess you could say, and the Sushi Roll, which is a fun game as well. Both great games to talk about. I want to also thank everyone for popping in to say hi. Do us a favor if you are new to my channel or Anthony's channel. These are streaming to both, but go ahead, give us a like and a holla, ring that bell. We definitely want to keep growing and creating great content. We'll do more of these. Creators Corner, of course, coming up. I hope you join that, and definitely check out Anthony's channel to see that video about gardening day. I will just say that you'll definitely see at least one thing that you might have heard about here today. Potentially. I don't know. Do I know anything? I don't know. What I do know is that this has been a lot of fun. So thank you for tuning in. With all that said, I just want to thank you for coming aboard the Express, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.